Bosses are pretty much a staple in video games, or even cliché at this point. They act as a way of testing the player's skills on everything they know about the game, as well as providing some of the most intense and memorable experiences in the game from both a story and gameplay perspective, and the Fire Emblem series is no stranger to this. Most chapters in Fire Emblem end with you taking on the boss of that chapter, who is more often than not the most difficult enemy on the field, and these battles test everything you know about class stats and skills, the weapon triangle, which weapons are super effective against certain classes, in order to provide some of the most memorable and downright breathtaking moments in the entire series. Sure, some bosses go down at the drop of a hat, or sometimes take the form of the most common of bandits and thugs, but most of the time, the bosses in Fire Emblem are not only difficult units to deal with, but also have a surprising amount of character and emotion to them. And today, this list is dedicated to my top 10 best bosses in Fire Emblem, and this list was requested by the YouTube users Ronan Linten and VforVendetta. Now before we get started, this point needs to be addressed. This video is not ranking the best villains in Fire Emblem. The reason for this is that I'm ranking these boss fights on both the bosses themselves in terms of character and backstory, as well as how good the battle is. In order to qualify for this countdown, the bosses have to hit both of these marks, otherwise they don't make the cut. For example, you could have a character who's really interesting and fantastically developed, but if the boss fight is either boring or piss easy, then sadly that doesn't count, and vice versa. Now this countdown will include both normal bosses and final bosses, and though I'll try not to be too biased towards it, but I will also take into consideration the chapter you fight the bosses in. Now this list is obviously a very personal list, and quite a lot of the most famous Fire Emblem bosses aren't going to be on this list for reasons I've just explained, so don't get too upset or angry if a certain boss doesn't show up. Also, if you see my top 15 best Fire Emblem chapters video, it should be pretty easy to guess who's going to be on this list, but only a select few. I like to think I'm not that predictable. And as always, I'm only looking at the bosses in Fire Emblem 7, Sacred Stones, Path of Radiance, Radiant Dawn, Shadow Dragon, wait actually no bosses from Shadow Dragon on this list, and Awakening. And once again, I must stress this that I am not looking at Fire Emblem Fates, since that game is not out in the West yet. And with that cleared up, it's time to bring your A-game people, because these bosses are out for blood, and I'm ready for them. Come on boy, come try me! Number 10 on this list is a boss I like for more personal reasons rather than his impact on the overall story, since he is a key part in a certain Wyvern Rider's story arc and character development, and is one of the most noble bosses in Path of Radiance. Yep, it's none other than Shiharu. Remember when I said Fire Emblem bosses can have a surprising amount of character and emotion to them despite being in the game for a very short amount of time? Well, Shiharu is a prime example of this. Shiharu is the boss of Chapter 20 in Path of Radiance. Shiharu's main purpose in the game is that he is Jill's father and a general in the Daein army. Shiharu is one of the most noble and respectable characters in the entire game. Both he and Ha used to be part of the Benioff Sacred Knights, but soon left after seeing the corruption in the Benioff Senate, and considering the shit these assholes will pull off in events to come, I think they made the right choice. As such, they both joined the Daein army and unfortunately had to commit horrible acts like the Goose Hunts, as well as flooding Taurega in order to halt Ike and his team. Battling against him with certain units shows that Shiharu was always against these types of acts, and he even instructs Ha to leave this battle and make sure that the villagers make it through this unharmed, which shows just how noble of a character he is. And despite being completely against Petrine's tactics, his loyalty as a soldier prevents him from taking action. His appearance also marks a massive turning point for Jill, since depending on her support levels, she will possibly rejoin her father and fight against you, showing that she has deep admiration and respect for him, and that unless she is swayed by the other members of the Grail Mercenaries, her personal bias will cause her to revolt against you. In any other instance, I would be against this type of thing from a gameplay perspective, but here it works really well and fits Jill's character perfectly. Gameplay wise, Shiharu is one of the strongest and most dangerous bosses in Path of Radiance. This guy has high levels of HP, strength, defense, and skill, and surprisingly good resistance too, though his luck stats are terrible. Adding to this is that he is equipped with a tomahawk, meaning mages and archers stand no chance against him considering his bulkiness and the level of resistance. As such, you must fight very carefully and take your time with this boss, as he is not the type of boss you could easily one-shot. Chapter 20 is also a rather fun level to tackle. Yet it's not groundbreaking, but it still offers a good challenge and focuses more on making your units use the terrain and open space when confronting the enemy. which encourages you to spread your team out and focus on placing the right units in the right areas. Shihara may not be a major antagonist or have considerable bearing on the entire story, but for his character, impact on Jill, and tough yet satisfying battle, he is more than worthy to be number 10 on this list of best Fire Emblem bosses. Number 9 on this list, we actually have a double helping this time, since this spot is shared between two bosses in Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. There are not only really tough bosses and good characters, but share an interesting gimmick that determines their levels and events in the story depending on which lord's story you decide to follow, as well as the combined level of your lords at that particular chapter. And these bosses are the brothers Lloyd and Lilith. I imagine some of you may cry foul since I'm putting two bosses in a single slot, but considering their nature in the game as well as their overall stats and levels, they're essentially two sides of the same coin. Lloyd and Lilith are bosses in Fire Emblem Blazing Sword and are part of the Four Fangs, an elite group within the Black Fang that are comprised of some of the strongest members within the organisation, with Lloyd being referred to as the White Wolf and Lilith being known as the Mad Dog. Despite being members of the Black Fang, they're not exactly bad people. Lloyd is very calm and well composed and has an extreme level of loyalty to his father, never questioning his orders and following all missions without question, even if he doesn't like the nature of them. Lilith is the younger brother, and as such he's much more rash and impulsive, but has an extreme amount of respect for the ones he loves and those closest to him, like Lloyd, his father, and even Nino, showing that these characters are still respectable warriors and not completely heartless. When it comes to how they fare on the battlefield, it tends to depend on how strong your lords are in the chapters you face them, since if you aren't level 50 when engaging them first time round on either Hector or a Leeward storyline, you will face one of them in chapter 23 and the other in chapter 27. As such, their levels will vary depending on who you fight first, but both bosses should not be taken lightly. Lilith is of the hero class and Lloyd is of the swordmaster class. Both are packing really high stats and some strong weapons. Lloyd is considered the weaker of the two, but even still he's got very high levels of strength, speed, luck, skill and resistance, making him quite the hard hitter, and he also has the sword Light Brand, which can deal magic based attacks similar to Eleven's sword. Lilith is definitely the harder of the two, since even though he's packing the same weapons, he has even more strength and defense than Lloyd, making him the bulkier of the two and can take a considerable amount of time to defeat, even with your best units. Both Lilith and Lloyd are great bosses on their own, but I feel they work best as a duo. Both of them are very challenging bosses and share a unique level system gimmick which can determine the difficulty of the battle, but regardless, both the White Wolf and Mad Dog are not to be messed with, since the only bones you'll give these dogs are your own. Lloyd and Lilith were prime examples of the fact that not every member of the Black Fang is completely heartless. I mean, yeah, a good 90% of them are, but the 10% that aren't are characters with a sense of nobility and respect that you find out throughout the course of the game, learning the error of their ways and trying to turn over a new leaf. Number 8 on this list is indeed a noble character and is the first member of the Black Fang who genuinely seems like a good person. And while he may not be a noble lady of Seisen, he certainly quite is the noble Seisen man. Okay, that was pretty forced, but nevertheless, at number 8 on this list, we have Uhai from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. To me, both Uhai and the chapter he is the boss of represent the main turning point in Fire Emblem 7, since the story gets much darker from here on, as evidenced by the death of Leela, and the chapter you do battle in is the Dread Isle. And I've talked about this chapter before and expressed how good of a chapter it is, being the first true sense of challenge in Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, as well as being one of the few good fog levels, and the boss of this level is just as challenging. Uhai, like Raph, is a nomad or bow knight if you will. As such, he has very high levels of strength, defense and skill, as well as having really good resistance stats, making it so that magic users should not go anywhere near him or else they're going to need a range check on those healing staffs. Uhai also has access to a steel sword, short bow and longbow, allowing him to easily cover all areas of combat, and worst of all, this guy is surrounded by forest section of the map, giving him a boost in defense and evasion. I mean, yeah, your units can get a boost too, but trust me, Uhai is the one who's really benefiting from this. Character-wise, Uhai, like both Lin and Raph, is of Saeson blood and has an extreme sense of honour to him, as he quickly lets Lin go after taking her hostage, as he feels that this is cowardly and dishonourable. And even when he dies, he acknowledges his defeat with grace and tells the team where they can locate the Dragon's Gate. Hell, both Lin and Ali would state that they wish they had met him under different circumstances, as they both say they saw the shades of a good man inside him. Uhai may not be the most plot-important character in the story of Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, but it certainly adds to the more emotional moments of the story, and shows that the Black Fang is not completely evil, but rather there are good men and women present who are unfortunately made to do evil deeds. Add to this a tough and very intense boss battle with one of the best levels in the game, and you have a recipe for the 8th best boss in the Fire Emblem series. Okay, as much as I love Fire Emblem Awakening, I hate to admit it, but the bosses in that game are overall rather piss poor. I mean, the mini-bosses are some of the most one-dimensional bad guys I've ever seen, and hardly even put up much of a challenge, and the main villains are some of the worst in the series, being overall boring and not being much of a threat or very original. I mean, just look at obviously not Jafar over here, Warhot, or as I like to call him, Bato on a bad day, and Gangrel, aka the poor man's Ashnard. Granted, some of the villains in Awakening are rather good, and number 7 on this list is the best boss in Awakening, which is kinda sad when you come to think of it, but nevertheless, we have the one and only Yanfei. Yanfei, like the previous entries on this list, not only serves as a challenging and memorable boss, but is also a very interesting character and has a surprising amount of emotional depth to him. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. Being one of Warheart's generals, Yanfei is one of the strongest and most dangerous members of Warheart's army. Gameplay wise, Yanfei, being a swordmaster, has very high levels of speed and skill, pretty much guaranteeing that he will hit anyone you throw at him, even twice in some instances. Not to mention he has both respectable strength and resistance, making it so mages stand no chance against him, since his sword Amatsu can hit enemies from 2 squares away. Adding to this is that Yanfei has a skill advantage, which can allow him to attack first, so be careful when trying to get that last hit on him, since he could tip the scales on you. Hey, that's my line! Shut your mouth, Robin, and get out of here! Why don't you go seduce more of your precious waifus? So yeah, Yanfei is a pretty tough boss if you're not prepared, but his character is what really makes him shine. Despite being a man of few words, Yanfei's story is filled with tragedy and honor, as he was the king of Chonsin, and lived happily with his parents and younger sister Seri. When Warheart invaded his land and killed his parents, Yanfei became one of Warheart's generals so Exodus would spare Seri's life, and because of his silent demeanor, Seri knew nothing about this and simply thought Yanfei betrayed her. During Chapter 18, Sibling Blades, Yanfei is defeated and Seri unfortunately learns the truth after killing her brother, and it almost tears her apart. She thought her brother was nothing but a coward and a traitor, only to realize later that all of this was for her sake and to keep her alive. It's moments like these which make Awakening, hell, Fire Emblem in general, to be so great, showing the extent of what people will go through for their loved ones and what acting rashly without thinking can amount to. Yanfei's story perfectly encompasses this along with a very challenging battle, making him the best boss in Fire Emblem Awakening and the 7th best boss in Fire Emblem. Which is kinda sad when you think about it, but it could have been worse. Yanfei could have ended up like this.
But Beardman, you do not know the way of the samurai. You have dishonored your father. You hurt my Edo.
If there's one thing the fantasy genre absolutely loves, it's dragons. I mean seriously, dragons are awesome and are some of the most famous creatures in any form of fantasy. DreamWorks loves dragons, Lord of the Rings loves dragons, Monster Hunter loves dragons, there's Spyro the Dragon, Dragon Ball Z, American Dragon, Chaos Dragon, and oh god no, get that shit out of here right now, now! Anyway, yeah, everyone loves dragons, and oh boy does Fire Emblem love dragons. Often dragons in Fire Emblem are seen as creatures of immense power and valor, often being depicted as creatures that rival the gods in their sheer power and are surrounded with so much awe and majesty, you can't help but marvel at them. So it makes sense that the final boss of Fire Emblem Blazing Sword would be a dragon. I mean, it was either that or Nagal, and let's face it, dragons just make everything better. Yes, for number 6 on this list we have the dragon from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. Now this boss obviously doesn't have much character aside of being a giant fire-breathing dragon, but even so, the dragons were built up throughout the entire game as these beings of awesome power and might, and my god is that ever right. The dragon boss from Fire Emblem Blazing Sword may just be the hardest final boss in the entire Fire Emblem series. The dragon boss has a whopping 120 HP and will always deal 37 points of damage. It doesn't matter what your stats are, you are going to have to lose 37 HP if you get hit, and considering this guy has some of the highest stats in the game, trust me when I say this, have as many medics with psychic staffs on standby. Your main force will be focused on dealing the damage but not taking it. As such, make sure you can heal them after an attack or else they are going to get burnt to a crisp. The fight itself is so epic though. What with the dragon gate being opened and an army of dragons just moments away from passing through, it's a good thing that those 2 other dragons were destroyed or else we'd be really fucked right now. Despite being nothing more than a raging beast, the dragon boss from Blazing Sword managed to be one of the toughest and most epic bosses in the series, but the real reason this boss is so awesome is because it's a fucking dragon! Majority of this countdown, I've been talking about how certain bosses are actually good characters that aren't completely evil, which is all well and good, but the sad truth is most bosses in Fire Emblem are evil and not very nice people. Granted, some are worse than others, and this particular boss has got to be one of the most vile, evil, black-hearted, backstabbing, unforgivable, despicable bitch you could ever imagine. But my god, is she one hell of an awesome boss and has fought in the best chapter in Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. God damn you, Sonya! I imagine quite a lot of you are writing angry messages in the comments, not towards me, but rather how much you hate this woman. And you know what? I don't blame you. Those who play Fire Emblem Blazing Sword will know that Sonya is one of the most evil characters in the game and the one person you just cannot wait to kill. And to be honest, that's what makes her such a good boss. You want to take this bitch down for all the shit she's done and remove one less vile person from this world. Those who haven't played Fire Emblem Blazing Sword might think she can't be that bad, but oh boy, you've got no idea. Sonya is one of the girl's morphs and is the adoptive mother of Nino. I say adoptive because Sonya actually raided Nino's village when she was young and completely slaughtered her family, and only raised her due to the girl's wishes. In fact, Sonya never even hugged Nino or said she loved her, despite Nino only wanting to be loved by her and doing anything she says. Talk about a heartless bitch. And if you think that's bad, Sonya orders Nino to be killed after she completes her mission, and Sonya gives the order without giving it a second thought. I mean, even Jafar couldn't bring himself to hurt Nino, and yet Sonya's got no issues with this? Do you now see why so many people hate her? Sonya is also really vain and full of herself, seeing herself as quote-unquote a perfect being. Granted, she is pretty damn hot, and that humans are nothing but waste. Talk about being stuck up your own ass. Gameplay-wise, Sonya is one boss you have to be very careful when approaching, since she has the spell Bolting. Yes, she can hit you from over 10 squares away, which is worse by the fact that because of the chapter's layout, you are limited on how your units can move about the map, so you might find yourself trapped in the corner at times. Once you get close enough to fight Sonya head on, don't be surprised if your health bar suddenly drops like a fucking rock, since Sonya has very balanced stats all at high levels, making it difficult to really get the edge over her with pretty much any class. Meaning you have to fight this boss very carefully and make sure you've got units that can deal damage and tank hits. Funny enough, despite having really good overall stats, she has no luck stats. I'm serious, her luck stats are 0, so you may have a better chance of landing critical hits compared to most bosses. Also, the chapter you face her in is, in my opinion, the best chapter in Blazing Sword, but I've talked about that great lengths in another video and I don't feel like rambling. Sonya might be the most evil character in the entire Fire Emblem series, but she makes for one hell of a great boss, being very difficult to take down, matched with the urge to kill this sexy yet sadistic woman, along with tackling the best chapter in the entire game, makes Sonya the 5th best boss in the Fire Emblem series. I guess she really is a perfect being. Wait a minute, an artificially made human, being of incredible power, someone who's stupidly attractive and incredibly vain, and treats her creator like a father or a god figure? Oh my god, Sonya's lost from Full Metal Alchemist!
I've been watching you, child. The first time I caught a glimpse of you was almost 4 years ago. The sky was ablaze with fireworks that night.
The villain is the character that audiences are meant to hate, since they're, well, evil, and cause others pain and misery. However, there are a handful of characters that don't start off evil, but rather become evil due to unfortunate circumstances. In fact, a good chunk of these characters started off as good guys before becoming bad guys. Number 4 on this list is exactly that, only wanting to help out his people and become a strong king for his country. His goal in life was to help others and to be worthy of their respect, who sadly became corrupted by the darkness and landed on number 4 on this list. Yes, it's none other than Lion. Lion is on here more for character purposes compared to being a boss, but regardless, his character and story arc more than make up for his shortcomings in the boss department. Now, I've talked about Lion before in my top 10 Nintendo villains video, so sorry if I sound like I'm repeating myself. Unlike most villains, Lion wasn't evil from the start and never had any evil intentions or motives most of his life. Being the son of the Emperor Grado and best friends with both Ephraim and Erica, Lion always wanted to become a strong king and protect his people, to live up to his father's legacy and make everyone happy. Both Ephraim and Erica believed Lion would make a wonderful king, since Lion was kind, compassionate, smart, understanding, gentle, and an all-round nice guy. And if it wasn't for the Sacred Stone of Grado, all of this would have come to fruition. This leads into the events of Sacred Stones, as one of the Sacred Stones contains the spirit of the Demon King, who slowly corrupts Lion's soul, as he originally planned to use the stone's power to help out others. As such, Lion became possessed by the Demon King and went about declaring war on Renias and having to fight both Ephraim and Erica, despite him trying his hardest to resist the Demon King. Speaking of fighting, Lion, in terms of being a boss, can be rather difficult if you decide to rush in blindly or use a class that is highly susceptible to magic attacks, since he has high levels of HP, resistance, magic, and defense stats, and has some of the best dark magic terms like Nosferatu and Fenrir, though his skill, speed, and luck are lacking, making it unlikely for him to crit you or land 2 hits. You also fight Lion twice the Sacred Stones, which helps to build up Lion as a more imposing threat the second time around. Despite not being an impressive boss, Lion more than makes up for it for being such a sympathetic and complex character. Lion is one of the best villains in the Fire Emblem series and one of the best characters in Sacred Stones, and I've said it once so I'll say it again. Lion, in another world and in another time, you'd have made a great king. Like I said before, dragons are awesome and make everything better. I mean, in the case of Fire Emblem, they are some of the hardest enemies in the game, case in point the final boss in Blazing Sword, and are often creatures of legend that have existed for thousands of years. So you can imagine how much shit was coming out of my pants when I tackled Rebirth 3 from Radiant Dawn, because nothing says you're completely fucked like fighting the King of Dragons. Holy fucking shit, was this boss intense! Never mind the fact that you're in a room filled with dragons, never mind the fact that you can only fight with the weapons that be given Yoon's blessing, which bit me in the ass first time around. Dginsia alone makes this chapter, and this guy will burn you to a crisp unless you have leveled the fuck out of your best units or have the Lagoose Kings on standby, because this dragon is not fucking around. Before I break down this soul-crushing fight you must partake in, let's examine the Dragon King himself. Dginsia first appeared in Path of Radiance and is the king of the dragon tribe in Goldoa. What sets this guy apart is that he is one of Ashira's 3 heroes who fought against Yukuni years ago. As such, Dginsia has an awesome presence and is not someone to be trifled with. That said, Dginsia is somewhat, how should I put this, ancient. Tiban refers to him as a living and stubborn fossil, since he feels that in order to prevent Ashira awakening, the Lagoose must not interfere with any wars and thus remain completely neutral despite the hardships that the Lagoose have suffered through at the hands of both Dayan and Benion. As such, my first impressions of Dginsia could be summed up as Goldoa shall remain neutral, for I am a stubborn jackass. When after facing him as a boss, Dginsia reveals a surprising amount about himself and develops a lot of character within just a few minutes, since after speaking to Yoon directly, he apologized for twisting history in order to make Yoon seem like a dark god, as well as explaining why he intended to remain neutral this entire time, since if the dragon type were to ever taste blood or experience war, they would not stop until everything is burnt to a crisp. It was this moment which made me respect Dginsia a lot more and better understand his motives. Granted, I still question some of his actions, but overall I think he's cool. Gameplay wise, Dginsia is a fucking nightmare to battle, having a whopping 100 HP and some of the highest stats in the game. Aside from magic, Dginsia excels in every area. Not helping this is that he is a skilled nihil, which negates your character's skills, so you pretty much have to rely on pure skill to win this fight. Throughout my time battling this guy, I found that the only units who even stand a chance against him are Tibon, Kanagus, Ike, Shinon, and Ileana. Since the first three are some of the strongest units in the game, Shinon can hit him from over 3 squares away and not be in harm's way, and Ileana has access to the strongest thunder magic in the game, which is super effective against him. But everyone else couldn't do shit. Yep, not even Gatetree, Ha, Jill, Alincia, Jeffrey, Titania, Xerox, and even Nephin. Radiant Dawn's endgame really went all out in having some of the most epic bosses in the Fire Emblem series, and Daginsis certainly fits the bill on this one, being built up as the king of the dragons and having power that rivals the gods. At this point, not even God can help you now. Funny enough, for number 2 on this list, we have another double helping of bosses, since this entry goes to 2 bosses who, while not exactly related, do appear in the same chapter together and are 2 of the main villains in Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. And with that said, it's a dead giveaway to who these bosses are, so without further ado, I give you both Kaliak and Valta. These guys are the Fire Emblem version of high school bullies in my eyes. Both of them take advantage of the weak, are manipulative, overbearing, despicably evil, use their power for personal gain, and delight in causing others misery. Man, what a bunch of assholes. But these assholes sure as hell make for some awesome bosses. Now I've touched upon these guys in my top 15 Fire Emblem chapters video, but now I can really go into depth with these guys to show how much I love and hate them at the same time. Both Kaliak and Valta are Imperial generals in the Grado army and some of the main villains in Fire Emblem Sacred Stones. Both these men are ruthless and sadistic, taking pleasure in killing others and never showing any signs of mercy, not to mention being tenacious backstabbers. Speaking of which, these two also have strong ties to both Joshua and Cormac, since Kaliak murders Joshua's mother and Valta murders Cormac's brother, which makes the confrontation between these characters more personal compared to a typical boss battle, as both Joshua and Cormac have reasons to seek revenge and deserve to be the ones to end the lives of these monsters. Ah, such poetic justice. Despite being completely horrible, Kaliak and Valta are damn good at their jobs, since Kaliak is able to destroy 2 of the Sacred Stones and Valta manages to seriously injure Seth in the beginning of the game. Speaking of being good at their jobs, did I mention these guys are some of the toughest bosses in Sacred Stones? Yeah, I know Sacred Stones is the easiest Fire Emblem game, but these guys will be here to remind you that you simply can't steamroll this game, and you have to think very carefully when battling these 2. Out of the 2, I find Valta to be overall easier, since he is of the Wyvern class and is weak against bows, magic, dragon spears, lance reavers, and dragon axes, which can give you a major boost against him, but he still has very high strength, speed, and skill, so don't be too careless. Kaliak definitely puts up more of a fight, since he has the hero class and is a much more well-rounded character who can't be exploited or taken advantage of. Also, he can cover both long and short range combat, so be sure to have characters like Joshua or Garrick on standby, since they tend to have the best chances against him from my experience at least. Both Kaliak and Valta are some of the most evil characters in the series and serve as a true test of the player's skill up until this point, being very challenging bosses that you want to take down for a very long time, as well as providing a personal fight for both Joshua and Cormac, thus making them the best bosses in Sacred Stones and the second best bosses in the Fire Emblem series. Which just leaves the number 1 entry. It's the Black Knight. Well, I'm sure this was a big surprise. Anyone who's watched any of my Fire Emblem related videos should have guessed this from the very start. And really, could you blame me? In pretty much every video, I've expressed how everything surrounding the Black Knight is pure Fire Emblem gold. Being the best villain and one of the best characters in the series, having the best level in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, having one of the best pieces of music ever composed in the series. Hell, I rank this guy as my 3rd favorite Nintendo villain. Why? Because he's the motherfucking Black Knight! I won't go too into detail with his character analysis since I've gone over that in another video, but the Black Knight is essentially Fire Emblem's answer to Darth Vader. Since the Path of Radiance, he's shrouded in mystery, is one of the strongest, if not the strongest characters in the game, and is a constant looming threat when he is, as well as isn't on screen, and kills Ike's father, fueling Ike's revenge against him and resulting in the best chapter in the game. In Radiant Dawn, he returns to help Micaiah save Dayan, and is single-handedly responsible for the Great Benion Massacre of Part 1 Endgame. His reappearance also gives Ike another reason to pick up the sword Ragnar and once and for all get revenge for his father. In fact, it's in Radiant Dawn that we discover that he is actually General Zelgius, as well as learning about his backstory and motives, showing that this Knight of Darkness still has a human side and is actually rather sympathetic. But enough of that, let's talk about the Black Knight as a boss character. You know how pretty much every boss in Fire Emblem can be attacked by multiple units in order to whittle down their health so you can deal the finishing blow without risk to yourself? Well, the Black Knight tells you to go fuck yourself. Since in both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, Ike is the only one who can damage the Black Knight and is alone for both fights, aside from Mist helping you in Path of Radiance. As such, you have to be very careful with how you proceed in these battles, as you can't rely on outside help. It's just you and the Black Knight from beginning to end, and it's hard as hell. Stat-wise, the Black Knight has got to be one of the strongest characters in the Fire Emblem series, period, since all his stats are insanely high, and the fact that he is one of the best weapons in the game, Alondite, that covers both short and long range attacks. Don't be surprised if you end up dying just after a few turns. When you fight the Black Knight, you must make sure that you always have enough HP to tank his hits and never be too eager to deal damage or he will kill you. Also, though his fight is somewhat easier in Path of Radiance, thanks to Ike being able to use Ether, in Radiant Dawn neither Ike or Black Knight can use any of their skills, so make sure Ike is at his max level or else you're fucked. What else is there to say about the Black Knight? He's one of the best characters in the entire series, without question the best villain in the series, is home to the overall best chapters in the series and is all around just a fantastic character, which is why he takes the #1 spot as the best boss in the Fire Emblem series. This has been CRASHX500. I wish you guys a great night, take care, and no matter how good you think you are or how much training you've done, the bosses in Fire Emblem will be there to remind you that there's always someone better. And because of that, I'm really starting to dread playing Fire Emblem Fates. This is pretty obvious at this point, but depending on which storyline you decide to take will determine whether or not you'll be battling Noir or Hoshido. And if the characters are anything like the previous Fire Emblem characters, there's going to be so many feels when you kill them.